We have here quite simply the newspaper, the printed edition of the Post-Standard. And as we know, the paper will have some bad news in it. There always seems to be plenty of bad news and all kinds of predictions about more bad news and everything else. And sometimes it even has good news. Well, our gospel tonight takes bad news and turns it into good news. And that's really something. We take bad news, turn it into good news. We remember the story. The religious authorities bring to Jesus a woman who has been caught in the very act of committing adultery. And they did that to test him, see if he'd say the wrong thing. And there's some things we don't know about the story, and some things we do. First of all, we don't know what happened to the man, right? We got the woman right there, that's no question. There's no even mention of the man. And it takes two people to commit adultery. Now, we do know that she was married, because only a married woman could commit adultery. We also can be very sure that she must have been terrified. She thought she was going to be put to death. Now, we can only imagine. We can't imagine. We really can't imagine exactly how she felt. Because stoning a person to death was probably one of the most cruel ways of executing someone ever invented in history. We know it meant throwing rocks at the victim until the victim's head was crushed and could no longer sustain life. We know she must have been terrified. The real lesson, though, for us is in how the Pharisees looked at this woman and how Jesus looked at her. That's the lesson for us. We know the Pharisees looked at her as someone to be judged and condemned. They had already made their minds up. Jesus looked at her as someone to be saved, not condemned. Jesus didn't condemn anybody. His only thought was helping that woman and turn that bad news into good news. Now, the real question each of us has to ask ourselves tonight is, how do I look at certain people and groups of people? Do I sometimes look at them the way the Pharisees did? People to be judged, maybe condemned? Or do I look at them the way Jesus did? Good people who might have made a mistake. How do we look at others? Certain people, certain groups of people. When we do this kind of judging, there's no room for love. When we're so busy judging people around us, it just doesn't leave any room for love at all. And love is the only thing Jesus asked us to do. It's all he asked of us. Love God, love your neighbor. But if we're judging, there's no room to do that. Maybe an example will help. A friend of mine's son was arrested for selling drugs, and she was furious at him. First of all, because he never needed to do it in the first place. He had a good job. Why would you sell drugs? And the charges became serious. And then she told me why she could never abandon him, no matter what he did. She said, he's my flesh and blood. I carried him in my body. I gave birth to him. He's mine. How could I possibly abandon him now? And that very simply is the same way that Jesus looked at the woman in the gospel, and the same way Jesus looks at each one of us and looks at the people around us. You are mine. I'll never abandon you. So as we go on now, let's ask our God and prepare to share in the body and blood of Christ. Let's ask our God for the help and the strength we need to be slow and to be quick. First of all, to be slow in judging those around us, particularly our family, our friends, our neighbors. How quick we are to judge them, whoever. Yet also ask God's help to be very quick to forgive and not abandon, as Christ would never do to us.